Welcome back. The NYC Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice announced the release of the NPCC report. The report confirms that NYC will continue to experience extreme heat events, intense rainfall, and flooding due to climate change. It also highlights the equity implications of climate change for vulnerable communities. Deputy Executive Director for the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, Paul Lozito, joined me to discuss the report and how the city plans to address these concerns. Paul, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Now, can you provide an overview of the Mayor's Office, larger efforts to address climate change?
Thank you, and thank you for this opportunity. So the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice was formed in 2022. It consolidates the Offices of Resiliency and the Office of Sustainability. What's important about that is that our office is focused on reducing the impacts of our city on the environment. And so that's working with industry leaders, building owners to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and general impact on our environment, and also focus dually on the implications associated with climate change. So we have hazards ranging from extreme heat, torrential rain, coastal flooding, other impacts, and our office works with agency partners, experts throughout New York City, public and private partnerships to identify issues and how to resolve those issues on an ongoing basis.
Now, how did the NPCC's relationship with the Mayor's Office regarding this effort initially start?
So the NPCC is really cool. So there's an intergovernmental panel on climate change that's sponsored by the UN going back to about 1998. And New York City, wanting to be a vanguard, a model, a leader for the country, convened its own panel, the New York City Panel for Climate Change, NPCC. And we started that in 2009, and that was codified into law in 2012. And what the NPCC does is it takes experts, convenes them to identify what the world will be like in 2100, 2050, 2100 as it relates to risk from the kinds of hazards that I discussed previously.
Now, why was it important for the NPCC to explore how climate change specifically affects New York City?
Absolutely. If you think of our office as a bit of a research and a development office, they provide the key research, the key data we need to understand where we will be in 50 to 100 years. And so if you're looking to protect the city, you'll need time to adapt to what the future climate is going to be. And so they help us to do that. So if the rain is falling substantially in certain areas, they will help us to their report helps us to identify that. And then we work with city agency partners and other institutions to identify how we cope with torrential rain in a particular area. That's one example. Another example is addressing extreme heat, right? And so we now know in consultation with the NPCC and from other scientists that we are entering a humid subtropical climate, right? A climate that's more akin to cities in the South. And it's how do we cope with that future being hotter and wetter?
And I think this is so interesting because as New Yorkers, we kind of just live life day by day, and we notice the changes, but we don't often discuss it, or we'll just say, oh, today was really hot, but we don't think deeply about why this is happening. So I think this report was so important. Can you just tell us a little bit, about some of the key points in the report?
So hotter and wetter. So you'll know, everyday New Yorker will know from last year that I think it was about 70+% of the weekends were rainy. Yes. 2023 was the hottest year on record. January was the hottest January we've had. And so you're seeing less snow, you're seeing just a warmer environment, and you're seeing more extreme weather events. So you think of like last September, Tropical Storm Ophelia, Hurricane Ida, Superstorm Sandy's of the world, in addition to much hotter summers.
Now, what was the Mayor's Office initial response to the NPCC report regarding the pattern of NYC's extreme weather changes?
I think from the report, it's just a renewed sense of purpose. We revised the report. This is the 4th version of the report. And so when we get our revised numbers, what we do is we take that information and we try to take action. What we've learned from the report can seem scary to people, but our goal is to work with our city agency partners to make sure that New Yorkers have the best quality of life and the safest quality of life as it relates to climate change moving into the future. So it was more of a renewed sense of purpose. And a gratitude to the NPCC. These are volunteer scientists that help us.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. Now, you mentioned that it can be scary, and I think that is like such a really important just thing to point out, because I think that a lot of people don't want to face, the effects of climate change or even acknowledge it because it is scary. In your work, how do you deal, or just how does the organization deal with kind of just grappling with that harsh reality that, our world is changing because of climate change?
I think the most important thing to do is knowledge is power and communicating in a real and practical way. So instead of talking about climate change globally, talking to a community, I'm thinking of our Climate Strong Communities program. We go to a community, we say, these are the risks in your neighborhood. These are the things that we can explore to try to address those risks. Because addressing climate change can be as simple as planting a tree.
Now, I want to talk about the environmental justice part of everything. Now, low-income communities and communities of color are disproportionately impacted by environmental inequities. Can you detail some of the ways these communities are uniquely affected?
I'm happy you asked that question. Our office is the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, intentionally focused on environmental justice and repairing past harms to communities that have been communities of color. And the way we try to target that is when we think about a climate risk or a climate hazard, we also overlay what communities have been historically impacted. So I'm thinking of, and we'll talk more about this, our Environmental Justice NYC report, which identified citywide what areas have been historically disadvantaged and how those communities have been adversely impacted by climate risk.
And I want to talk a little bit more about education, because unfortunately the communities that are most affected don't always have the resources to understand what's even happening in their community, why they may be having higher rates of asthma, and so many other things. So how does the mayor's office kind of approach education in that aspect?
I completely agree. What we do, again, I think it comes down to the fundamentals of knowledge is power. I know we did just come out with our EJ NYC report that has a mapping tool component, so you can visualize where the hazards are, so you can ask better questions about why that's happening in a particular area.
Now, how are these concerns heightened by climate displacement risk? And for those who don't know, can you just explain what that is?
Climate displacement risk is you are if you live in an area where, say in the year 2100, that area more likely than not will not be safe for people to live in, right? And so then the issue at hand is, do you motivate people to move away from those areas, or how do you help those people cope with the climate risk, right? And the risk of displacement from where they are living. And when you have a historically marginalized community or underserved or under-researched community, when you move someone from that area to another area, you are reformatting the institutions and the resources they have available to them. And when you have less resources, then it's more difficult for you to move to another area.
And I'm so glad that we're having this conversation, because I think it shows that climate change is affecting so much more than just our weather. It's affecting just the way, as you mentioned, the way people live. It's affecting generations of families, because if you have to move and your entire family is from one area, I could just imagine the impact that could have on a generation of people. So I think it's so important that we're having this discussion. What can New Yorkers do to further support the city in this fight to protect our planet and our communities?
So civic engagement is core. Join your community board. You could be as young as 16. If you're a building owner, get flood insurance or call the New York City Accelerator. Think about ways that you can decarbonize your building, reduce your building's footprint. If you are someone just walking down the street and you see trash that's in a gutter, take the trash out of the gutter. That's the way the water leaves your community in a torrential rain event. Compost. Think about taking a bike versus driving, take the subway versus driving. Just think about everyday ways where when you're interacting with the environment, your impact can be lessened as you move through space.
Now, you mentioned something that I thought was interesting, and you said you could be as young as 16. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how, the mayor's office is getting like younger people involved in this fight?
Absolutely. I think what we try to do is engage, and this was a function of our when we announced our NYC report, we announced that at the Boys and Girls Club, right? Because we want young people to be educated about environmental justice and about climate change related issues, partially because those young people are at the forefront of addressing the change because they will be here in 2050 and 2100 to have to cope with the environment that we will leave behind.
And what do you hope, to see for the future of this fight? I know that it's been a very long one. I've been learning about this since I was in middle school. And I know that, as time goes on, more generations of children are going to be a part of this. What do you hope to see for the future of that?
What do I hope to see is I hope to see that we make more concerted efforts to use the information that we got from, say, the NPCC report to focus in on how to make meaningful change at the community level. So I think of it as, okay, you live in a certain area of the Bronx, you have an extreme heat issue. How do we help and organize around tree planting or making sure that instead of having a paved space, opening up that space so maybe it's grassland so that the grass can absorb water and it's just a higher quality of life.
And how do we get people in these marginalized communities who are already facing so many other challenges, to be more involved? Because I think that sometimes when it's not an immediate impact, people tend to kind of push it towards the back. So how do we get people in those marginalized communities to care or be a little bit more present in this fight?
I appreciate your question. I think that the way we get people to be involved in the fight is we make it about them. We meet them where they are in their community and talk about real quality of life issues in the context of climate change.
Well, I think this is such, again, an important conversation. Every time we revisit this topic, I learn a little bit more. Example with the climate displacement risk, that was something that I didn't think about previously. And I think that these conversations are always peeling back new layers on how it's going to affect our community. So, I appreciate you taking the time to come here to the Bronx. One of the places that are, that is heavily affected by this and kind of educating our community. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
To keep up with the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, please go to the website at climate.cityofnewyork.us and follow them on social media at NYC Climate. We have to take a quick break, but we'll be back with more Open after this.